Welcome to Between Two Psychs, a podcast where two psychologists and board-approved supervisors deep dive into many of the questions and challenges that provisional psychologists and early career therapists face in everyday practice, during training, throughout the internship, and beyond as they progress into working more independently. Your hosts, Isabelle Tombleson and Claire Trevitt, talk about a range of topics, specifically relating to psychologists and therapists who are just starting out.
Morning, Claire.
Morning, Isabelle.
Hello. It is. This is so good. So we are going to be talking about being honest with your supervisor today. This is a topic that Claire and I got a little bit excited about when we came up with the idea to talk about this. The idea came from some refresher training that I did for being a supervisor. It's something that we have to do every 5 years. And it came up as a theme in some of our discussions just around the benefit of setting it up as a supervisor with your supervisee early on about the benefit of being honest and sharing some of those more scary experiences of when you're first starting out as a clinician or when you're practicing as a clinician, as a therapist. And we just thought, wow, there's so much that we want to share about this, not only being supervisors, but, being therapists ourselves. So that is what we're going to be talking about today.
It is, and so important. And the first thing I guess I wanted to share with people is that, from my own experience, I know that this just isn't easy. So we're encouraging you to do something that we know is actually very, very hard, but can be so beneficial.
That's right. That's
yeah.
right. It can be so beneficial. I think the message we want to convey to everyone today is that when we do make mistakes in therapy, and it does happen and it will happen, that is where we learn and grow. Mistakes, they feel awful, we feel terrible about it, but there's so much learning opportunity in them. So yes, so that's why we're particularly excited to talk about it today.
Yeah.
So where do we start?
Yes. Well, I think the first thing we were talking about when we started to discuss this was around sort of how do we begin to even set this up? This sense of, what are we as supervisors hoping for from our supervisees, which is for you to bring all of the things that you need support with. And also, how do you share those things that are perhaps a little bit difficult, and there's a sense of apprehension around how is the supervisor going to respond to I'm about to bring up? And the one thing I would say straight off is that, really, I would say there's nothing off the table with what you could bring to supervision. And your supervisor has most likely heard it all before, whether that's through their own experience with a client or with a supervisee, or even through something they might have read or some kind of theory. There are so many, I guess, mistakes or areas of support that we might have in this profession. And we can sometimes sort of hold this to ourselves and feel like we need to sort of keep it shut away because it feels so difficult to share. But really, most of these things happen to many of us. We've experienced ourselves.
Yeah. So you're talking there about the benefit of trying to establish this open, honest policy from the beginning with your supervisor if you've got that opportunity. So if you're a psychologist or therapist who's starting out with the supervisor soon, we encourage you to think about having this conversation with them and setting it up well from the beginning. But also just really normalizing how it's really normal and expected that we do make mistakes, or that we might not do everything as well as we could or want to, or that a client might not be happy with the way that we've done something, or we might even experience some unusual reactions in therapy, like feeling attracted to a client, or feeling another sort of unpleasant emotion with a client. Maybe we're feeling triggered by the client. Those sorts of things that can maybe trigger off an experience or a response in us, like shame or embarrassment or fear. Is this going to get me struck off? Is my supervisor going to make a report on me because I, told them that this happened, or that I did this, or that I feel this way? So these are, I guess, the reasons why we are encouraging and talking about this theme today, this topic today, because we want to share with everyone who's out there learning right now, and anyone who's listening to this podcast who's a practicing psychologist who's been doing this, maybe for years, but didn't have that openness with their supervisor where they could just lay it bare and learn from those experiences in a supportive environment. So setting it up from the beginning and knowing that we've probably heard it all before, and we've probably also done something similar or had a similar experience before.
Yes, yes. I mean, I think it's you'd sometimes be surprised at what other people have experienced.
Mm.
Coming back to that, that vulnerability and that setting it up, one of the things that I always encourage people to do before they've even seen a supervisor, in any blogs that I've written, or any discussions I've had with people, is, ask yourself that question when you're speaking to a new potential supervisor: is, do I feel like I could be vulnerable with this person? Do I feel like I could actually share some difficult things with them? And do I feel like I would be supported by them? I think these are very, very important questions for all supervisees to ask themselves around a potential supervisor, because it's so important that you do get the support that you need when you need it. And often those times are when something happens. There's a challenge, or a difficult session, or there's a difficult response, or difficult feelings, or someone's potentially threatening a complaint. All of these things can be extremely stressful and difficult, and these are the times when you absolutely do need support, and for someone to be there for you.
Thank you. So what you're sharing there with us, Claire, is about actually, when we do experience those mistakes, or when we do probably need someone that we can talk to most, that's why we want to encourage this, because maybe it's those times when we need someone most that we're not talking to someone, maybe because we haven't set it up with our supervisor from the beginning, or we haven't, discussed with our supervisor how to have those open conversations, or maybe just don't feel quite comfortable being vulnerable with them in the first place.
And it's a really hard thing to do, to be vulnerable. And that's essentially what we're asking our clients to do with us. And I always think that we want to create the conditions of safety as much as possible in our room, in our therapy room. And also I like to do that in supervision. But I'm also very aware that feeling safe can be quite subjective and isn't always so readily available to people. So we do acknowledge that actually some of what we're suggesting or inviting here could actually bring up some feelings in people, and that's completely normal.
That's a really nice message just to share. I'm hearing from you, Claire, that if us talking about this, making mistakes and being vulnerable does bring anything up for you, I think we would just encourage you to talk to your colleagues, talk to your peers, talk to a supervisor, even if it's not your supervisor, someone else's supervisor, perhaps, to get some support.
Yes, because that's what we're in the business of doing, is trying to support supervisees so that they can be in the best position to support their clients.
Mm, mm, mm. On that note, I wonder, if we could touch on like what you could do, say, for example, if you are listening to this podcast and you're thinking, okay, I want to try this thing that Claire and Isabel are talking about. I want to try and tell someone next time I feel like I stuffed something up or made a mistake. What would you do if you had a supervisor who you've not done this before with? How could you set that up to have that conversation with them? And then if you don't have a supervisor who you feel comfortable doing that with, because let's face it, not all supervisors are equal. Maybe we're not all, feeling comfortable to do that with them. Where else could you go and what other resources are there at hand? So I've got a few ideas, but Claire, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, I think that's such a good point because, well, first of all, it's about finding the person that you feel you can, even if just tentatively, begin to raise issues with. And perhaps a starting point, if you've never done this before, my suggestion would, for a starting point, would be start with something that you need help with, but that doesn't sort of creates such a sense of vulnerability and fear inside of you. So not the worst thing that you can imagine bringing up, but actually sort of test the waters a little bit and see whether or not the person that you're speaking with is receptive and supportive. And then that may help you to bring up some other issues that may feel either a little bit more pressing or urgent or a little bit more anxiety provoking, perhaps.
That's such a good suggestion. So you're almost kind of testing the waters a little bit with your existing supervisor there. And then if you weren't quite feeling comfortable to test the waters and approach your supervisor in the way that Claire's described, my suggestion would be to reach out to other peers, other colleagues. If you know of any colleagues that you work with, their supervisors, if you know that they're particularly supportive or open with these sorts of discussions, that would be sort of the next port of call, I think.
Yes, absolutely. That's so important because it's about accessing somebody that you feel comfortable with, and um, that's such an important starting point, particularly if what you're about to ask for help with just feels a little bit more than usual.
Mm,
It yeah, a little bit more scary perhaps than usual.
mm,
Yeah,
mm,
yeah.
yeah. And let's face it, right? Like we are sometimes conditioned to or taught that it's not good to make mistakes, or that if we do something wrong, if we make a mistake, like there's going to be a negative consequence or perhaps a negative perception of us. And especially, in the psychology space and possibly, for all therapists, we do tend to hold ourselves to really high standards. We might tend to be a little bit perfectionistic. And so it's really normal for us to want to avoid experiencing that vulnerability or avoid wanting, admitting when we haven't done something the way that we could have or should have or wanted to. Yeah.
Yes, I think that you know, the other thing I want to come back to is, sorry, I completely messed that up.
I lost my train of thought, so you're all good.
Sorry. I think the other thing that can be sometimes really helpful and really normalizing is asking other people, and again, someone you might feel safe with, what's the worst thing you've done? Have you ever
Mm,
made a mistake in therapy? Have you ever done something that you regret? And gosh, you might be really surprised at what you hear. And, if you're in a group of people, you can often find this can be quite contagious, and people will start saying, oh my gosh, yes, I did X, Y, Z. And someone say, oh yes, that's me. And then of course you've got that sense of normalization and validation,
mm,
because let's face it, we've all done it. We've all made mistakes, and we've
yeah.
all had situations that haven't gone to plan. And we've thought, oh my gosh, this is the worst thing ever. But actually, when we begin to share those things, we begin to realize that actually it's much more common than
Mm,
we realize at the time.
Imagine if we created a community where we did just talk about all of the things that we messed up. or all of the things that we felt like we didn't do well, or when we have been triggered if we've had countertransference because of, being human, having
Mm.
stuff in our own lives. It would be, I feel like it would be such a humbling, and I would be so grateful, a humbling space, but I would also be so grateful for that space because I would all of a sudden just be like, ah, okay, it's so okay to be imperfect. It's like this is, and being imperfect is in fact fantastic because as a result of me doing that mistake and sharing it with someone, I learned and grew probably tenfold and faster than what I would have if I had just kept it to myself.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, because and if we just try and do things perfectly all of the time, then it can
Mm,
really limit the possibilities. We don't sort of expand outside of that. And I often think that in supervision, I encourage people, bring your hardest cases. I
yeah,
love news stories. I love success stories, but you're right here with me and I want to support you. Tell me what
yeah.
you're struggling with. And
Oh,
let's
that's so good. I love that. And that could like, and again, that could almost be the way that you set things up with your supervisor, an existing one or a past one, where you could just be like, if you want to approach this topic, I want to talk to you about the hardest things. I want to share with you the most difficult experiences that I'm having right now. So it doesn't even have to come across as, this is the thing that I made a mistake on. It's like, let me share the hard things with you. I love that. That just kind of like changes the language a little bit and might make it help feel a little bit safer for supervisees of all experiences and levels.
Well, yes, because if it's normalized, then yes, it can be. And I'd love to hear your perspective on this, Isabel. But I am I'm quite big on sharing um, de-identified examples of where I've kind of messed up or had real challenges in my clinical work with my
Yeah,
supervisees to try and, you know, support them and again just normalize that this stuff happens. And,
yeah,
and I hope to handle things well most of the time, but there are times when
mm,
I've handled things terribly
mm,
afterwards, and I've thought, gosh, I'm not going to do that again. Like you say, that learning experience and think, okay, that was a great example of what not to do, and it becomes imprinted. And
yeah.
sure, we might do that again a few times. We're not perfect, and our unconscious can get the better of us. But I think if we can learn from these things, we can see that they have value.
Mm, mm. Yeah. So through learning through these things, we do see that they have value, but then also all of a sudden, if it's normalized and it's a part of just our process of being a therapist, then all of a sudden there's a weight off our shoulders of being okay, being imperfect and all of that stuff, which I really love. And I think for me personally, like I've probably only gotten good at airing my imperfections as I've become more experienced. I know in the beginning I was an incredibly anxious student, incredibly anxious provisional psychologist. I had the most brilliant supervisors and I knew I could trust them and I knew that they were safe spaces for me. But I know that I would almost go in there sort of shaking, like, oh, this is just, so terrifying, so scary having someone analyze and critique your work. So I think I'm sharing that with people who are listening to normalize if you're like me, if you had that very anxious predisposition or you tended to sort of be that way when you were learning and you've noticed that you have become a bit more open and relaxed as you've got more experience. But I'm also sharing it so that if you're like me now in your early career, um, see what you can do about, I'm planting some seeds with you to see if you can do something differently than what I did. So, because it will help you to grow so much faster. And it will also help that anxiety to calm down, that nervous system response to calm down. Because as soon as you do, like we teach our clients, as soon as we do the opposite of what the anxiety wants us to do, all of a sudden the anxiety loses its power and we're able to move forward and flourish.
I just love that you shared that because
Hmm.
such a personal but also a vulnerable experience, and it's modeling exactly what we're discussing here.
Yeah.
And from my own perspective as a supervisee, I was probably very much, again, very anxious and nervous to do well. But I can remember I would go in with all of my success stories and all of the things that I would do well. And my goal was to come out of supervision with a kind of 5-star tick.
I can relate to that so much. Tell me I'm good. Tell me I'm good. Reassure me that I'm good.
And it was like doing those role plays and wanting that perfect feedback. And I think that wouldn't be helpful. We're going to
Like
get
it's good for our ego, right? It's like the
it.
anxious part that needs reassurance that, we're not totally messing this up. A balance though of both, you know, getting that lovely recognition that we're doing a good job alongside some more constructive opportunities for constructive feedback. I think that's what we aim for. We're aiming for that now as supervisors, you and I, Claire. We hope that other supervisors are aiming for that as well. And we want to, embed this with our supervisee listeners who are tuning in so that you can learn from us and take this with you too.
Yes, because we've been there and we're still there. We're still, I mean, there are still things that I make mistakes in my practice.
Oh yeah.
I've not got that 5-star tick yet. And, and I still have to go to my supervisor and say, oh, this happened, or I'm struggling with this, but I've learned now to think, okay, I've got this hour, and what do I want? What do I need from this?
Mm.
And I'm going to get the most out of it if I say, this is what I'm struggling with. This is the
Yeah.
hard thing. And I did this, and I'm not sure that was the best course of action. And one thing I'll add to that is that sometimes what happens, and I've found with my supervisees and sometimes myself as well, is that we do take something and we think, we're being very vulnerable and we've made this sort of a mistake or haven't responded in an ideal way. And sometimes the feedback is, actually, that's exactly how I would have done that.
Mm.
Sometimes it's not necessarily what we're doing, but sometimes we can't necessarily impact all of our clients in the way that we want to. And we can put in a really big effort. And sometimes we can put in the best effort that we can, and we can do what we think are, the right things. And it doesn't always work because, of course, we've got that other factor. We've got the therapeutic relationship. We've got the therapies and the interventions that we're using. But then we've got that other factor, which is the client's history and experience. And if we've inadvertently
Yeah.
triggered something for them that we're not necessarily aware of, or it's not the right space or the time, sometimes
Yeah.
we might be responding completely appropriately.
Yeah.
And it still doesn't land, which always gives us room for thought around how can we work with this, but it's not always something that you've done.
Oh my gosh. It's really nice for you to remind me and hopefully our listeners about that, because you're so right. I mean, I'm thinking about the times when I've had supervisees in the spaces with me supervising them, and I've had those conversations of like, actually, that sounds completely appropriate, and that does sound like how I would have responded or how I would have done it, because we've got to take into consideration all those factors. So I love so much that you've just touched on that, and I hope it's helpful to hear that. But the other thing I just wanted to touch on as well is this noticing that as we mature and as we develop confidence and competence in our role as therapists, when we do start to feel a little bit more okay with being bringing those tough cases, bringing the hardest cases, prioritizing supervision for our learning, that's such a great sign that you are growing, and that not only is your your competence developing, but your confidence and I guess your sense of self and your identity as a therapist is developing. And that's like anyone who's noticing that they're going through that right now or is approaching that, like just celebrate that and give yourself a pat on the back because that's really wonderful. And if you're early in your career and your confidence is not super high and maybe your competence is not high yet either because you're only new, this is something to aspire to, I guess.
Yes, I think what you're naming there, and it's so important, is that actually in the beginning, it's so much more challenging to be vulnerable because we don't yet have the set of competencies or the confidence to feel that we're at the level that we want to be at. And that's completely normal. We've all been there too. And it
Yeah.
really it's tricky because you're trying to take in so much and learning, but also being present to the client in front of you and managing your own responses. And we do tend to, we take this work seriously, so we want to do a good job. So then of course we're going to have some anxiety about that, which is normal and to some degree healthy, as long as it doesn't begin to impede our learning or impede our ability to access the support that we need.
Yeah. Hey, so we did just want to share with everyone that I came across a research paper recently that is researching psychology supervisees' responses to supervision and experiences of supervision. And it was a really interesting outcome in the research that we will share the link to this paper in our show notes on our website, that 95% of the respondents to that survey said that they had not disclosed a low to moderate issue of importance with their supervisor. And I felt like that was such a relevant article that relates to what we're talking about here. And I guess it kind of just gives evidence to this experience that Claire and I are both talking about today, that that it is something that most of us probably are doing and can relate to.
Those stats are quite eye-watering, really, aren't they?
They are. I mean, it's almost 100%.
Yes. And that's low to moderate. So that really does speak to the fact that it can be so hard for people to come forward and share these things. I guess I'm just hoping that today we may have given people, I guess, first of all, to normalize that this is something that we're all experiencing. Experience at the beginning and continue to experience. The two of us are continuing to experience to some degree that level of vulnerability, but also the importance and what you miss out on when you don't access the support that is so beneficial to your learning, but also to you, I think, at an emotional well-being level as well, because when we feel supported, we feel heard, and our own needs are met, then we're very much more in a position to do this work and support other people.
Yeah. You're so right, Claire. I think touching on how being able to have those hard conversations with our supervisors would be beneficial to our well-being, most definitely, and probably would help to prevent with burnout as well.
I believe so. I really believe that it would help to reduce levels of burnout, because often with opening up and talking about some of these challenging, whether it's a mistake or whether it's something that's happening, it could be in the workplace, it could be a difficult relationship with a client, all of that information has the potential to be supported, whether it's by some kind of theory or by some practical strategies. As I said earlier, most of the time your supervisor will have heard all of this before and will have some avenue for addressing this. Even if they don't know themselves, or if it's a specific or niche area, there's usually somebody that will specialize in these
Yeah.
things. People
Yeah.
specialize in imposter syndrome, and
Yeah.
because it's something that's so common.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. So it's happening a lot. I mean, look, that research paper only looked at psychology supervisees who are early in their training, but I think it's probably safe to assume that across most of the talk therapy industries and professions, there's probably a similar experience. And on that note as well, like we haven't talked about this much very clearly before in our previous season and in this season. We do want to share this knowledge with all types of talk therapists. So I just want to let you all know, if I sometimes refer to psychologists, that's just a default thing. I think because that's my profession, and I'm surrounded by a lot of psychologists. But I am also surrounded by a lot of incredible talk therapists who have come from all sorts of different training programs and degrees and professions. So yeah, if anyone was just wondering that at all, we definitely want this to be a useful podcast and information that applies to anyone who does the talk therapy thing.
Yes, thanks for saying that, Isabelle, because there are so many common threads with social workers or psychotherapists and counsellors
Yeah.
and other therapists that might be in a similar situation. And yeah, it's about addressing some of those issues or concerns that really are common to all of us.
Mm.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah.
raising.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we've touched on most of the messages and the discussion that we wanted to touch on today. Like you mentioned earlier in the podcast, Claire, if anyone, is experiencing any anxiety, or they're feeling, not very comfortable in themselves after watching or listening to this episode, do reach out to the people that you have in your in your support group around you, peers, co-workers, other supervisors, managers, whoever you need and whoever you feel comfortable with to talk about your experience and get some support.
Yes, absolutely. And ask these people if they've ever made a mistake or needed to talk about something different, because you can be sure that they will have done.
Most definitely. Most definitely. We have all done it, and the research backs it up.
It does. It does. So thanks for tuning in today, and we will see you again in a fortnight.
Yes.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a 5-star rating. It really helps others find the show. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Between Two Psychs for more updates and resources. For more information and to explore everything we offer, head over to our website, betweentwopsychs.com.au. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time.